Welcome to the Ultimate Gamer Podcast, a show that features conversations with the trailblazers, thought leaders, decision makers, and investors who are defining the gaming and esports space. On the Ultimate Gamer Podcast, we take a journey into this dynamic industry and start to decode and reveal who and what's making news. It's about connecting, and it's about sharing the stories and vision of the people who make gaming and esports a global phenomenon. And now, please welcome your host, student of the game and connector to the esports community, Tommy Knapp.
Everyone, I'm Tommy Knapp, and this is an all-new episode of the Level Up Podcast presented by the Ultimate Gamer. On today's show, I have a conversation with Toa Dunn, Head of Riot Music Group at Riot Games. His professional career started in banking and trading, not your typical route to the music industry and gaming, but he'd always been involved in music from a young age. As we settled into our conversation, Toa told me about his youth playing the sax, dabbling in the jazz scene, and then ultimately DJing in college and around LA. He dove into the rave, hip-hop, and underground sound, had a radio show at USC, got into production, and was exposed to labels and artists. Like a good song, I found myself completely absorbed in his story. He went on to tell me about his introduction into Riot's world of video games and his involvement in producing one of the very first music videos for League of Legends. This was all a process of discovery for him and his team. We kept on looking behind the curtain of LOL champions and Valorant agents, the incredible mixture of live artists and holograms during the True Damage event in Paris, then spent some time in legal, contracts, and copyright. Toa had me so hyped at the end of this, I went to watch a KDA video that 350 million other people had already watched. You better join me now for this conversation with Toa Dunn. Good, man. How about you?
Doing, day by day, hanging in there.
You're on the West Coast. I saw that you went to USC. I used to be in the travel industry way back in the day, and we used to do college campus tours. So I took groups to USC and Stanford and Pepperdine and Cal Berkeley. Yeah, man.
Okay.
Yeah. So did you study? What'd you study at USC?
Yeah, actually, econ and finance. There of all things.
Yeah.
And whatnot. And you probably saw my background of kind of banking and trading is actually what I did straight out of college. But yeah, and here I am now doing kind of the things that I love, which is music and video games. So.
Yeah, man, listen, I can't tell you, I'm so excited about just talking to you about this because I've always been a huge lover and fan of music, never been a musician. I'm terrible. I can't play the piano or guitar or anything, but it's so much a part of my life. When I wake up in the morning, I throw music on. I've got music on when I'm working, so just really excited to talk to you about that. And as I kind of dug in a little bit and then I started doing some research, into Riot, I was like, man, I didn't have any idea how much music is a part of the gaming experience, and then really what you guys have under the hood over there, it's incredible. And I want to get into that, but kind of we always like to start these things. You and I haven't met. Normally I when I jump on these pods, I've met people, so I always like to go through that journey of talked about USC, but maybe you could tell us a little bit, because it is interesting going from a finance background to going into gaming, but it sounds like you had a passion and a joy and a love for gaming. So did you start out as a gamer when you were little, and did you, how did that transition into then going to USC and the rest of your career?
Yeah, I think it's one of those things, especially, back then, it wasn't about identifying as a gamer, but I always played video games. I remember from the very front of Nintendo when it came in, I think my dad had a general interest in kind of there's this, because it was the cool thing, there's these things called video games, you can now bring it home. And so I remember kind of having the Nintendo and having Duck Hunt and Mario and being the house on the block that my dad was like, yeah, just have your friends over, because it was, the kids were playing, they weren't getting into trouble and stuff. And so I think from a very early on, I had a great connection with just video games itself. And so just through growing up, I was, always playing video games. And then a little bit later, got into music in elementary, where I started playing the saxophone and kind of, classically trained, symphony, and then fell in love with playing jazz as I got into college.
Wow.
Into junior high.
Okay.
Fell in with jazz and whatnot. And so played out throughout high school. And then when I got into college, right, came to USC. And so I'm born and raised from Alaska, right? So
Oh, really?
yeah, I'm from Alaska. So it's
Where?
like,
Where in Alaska? I did a cruise
Fairbanks.
up there. Okay, Fairbanks. Yeah, we did a cruise
Fairbanks.
with the family. I don't know, like 3 years ago. We did that summer cruise and it was absolutely beautiful.
Yeah, did you guys get to? Yeah, it's one of those places like you should at least visit once in your life. Right?
Agreed.
Like, you got to see it. It's there's just things up there that aren't anywhere else in the world, right?
Yeah, and you could really see where you can go off the grid up there. You know, you could see where, because there were times when we had like no internet even on the ship, and then when you're traveling and you're seeing these icebergs, I mean, it was just incredible. We did the glacier tour where you fly up in a helicopter. Yeah, that was super. Yeah, that was super
you guys
cool.
got up close and personal, yeah.
Yeah, and then we did the dog sleds and everything, so that was pretty awesome.
Yeah, man. So I was from there, and there, you know, especially because this is before the internet was really taking off and stuff. It was own bubble there. Like I remember my exposure in high school to, like, I mean, all I knew was like MTV and kind of what was on like, you know, regular television as far as like what was broader from a music aspect. And then when I got into like hip hop in high school and kind of like DJing, I found out, I think that, you know, this is back in 56K modem or whatever, something like dial up, and finding out in New York, actually, there was this record shop called Upstairs Records or something like that.
Okay.
And they had just a website and they would post things. And so I started kind of saving up and buying VHS tapes of just like seeing kind of the scene of stuff. I was like, whoa, what is all this stuff? And so when I came to LA, it was just like full exposure, just like, yo, there's this underground hip hop scene, but not even just hip hop, all these different genres that were starting to, I went to like my first, basically kind of like a audiotistic, right? Which is like had a rave, but also had like hip hop rooms that had all of this stuff. And so
very cool.
Really got exposed and fell in love with just like music holistically and got into like music production. We had a radio show, KCR Radio at USC. Right. So started to understand of working with artists and labels to an extent.
Was that when was that with the, you know, the East Coast, West Coast, when that rivalry was going on? I don't even know if that rivalry still exists, but I mean, I know there was a big rivalry back in the day, and I used to play a lot of basketball, and when I was playing hoops, we listened to a lot of, you know, and it's hardcore and everything, but we listened to a lot of NWA, and NWA I think is from Compton right there in Southern California, you know, and then, you know, so LL Cool J and you know, Public Enemy were some of my favorites when I was growing up. But was that part of when you were there? Was that part of
no?
The East
So
Coast?
I got there like after that, right? So because I went to SC in '99.
Okay.
Right. So like a lot of that stuff, all that stuff was like kind of, it wasn't what it used to be, right? Like I think it came down by the time you got into the 2000s a bit. Like it was still there, right? Still people had that ownership of what was better. But as far as like what I remember that beef, like when I was in like, you know, high school and a little bit younger, like, yeah, I remember that scene. Or at least I watched it on TV, right?
Right. Yeah,
I watched it on TV.
Yeah.
And we definitely had people because of the military who came from different parts of the U.S., right? So they definitely came with like, not like it's Biggie in life and like nothing else, right? Because they were from the East Coast, and you guys coming from the West Coast that are in the military, like, no, man, it's like it's Tupac, it's NWA, it's this. So we got some exposure to that because people came up from there, but we weren't like in it, so to speak, right? Okay. So when I got to LA, it was really for me discovering kind of this really evolving sound, this underground hip hop sound. Like it was Dilated Peoples. It was, I mean, even for me, even though they weren't West Coast, it was they were still, I was really interested. I got to see them was Black Eyed Peas, but this was Black Eyed Peas before like Fergie.
Before they blew up, right.
Joints in the Jam. It was like that where I was like, yo, these guys are interesting, but like cool. They've got their own flavor and stuff. And so for me, I just got really exposed to this broader music scene and whatnot. But then when I graduated, you know, studying econ, I did what, you know, every good kid does. And I went into like, you know, basically banking for me and trading. Right. And so, but I was still doing kind of music production. I was working with like an indie label. I was their showcase DJ, also kind of like side producer on tracks. So still doing the things I love. And then I was also a DJ I started DJing the club scene as well here in LA and even in Hollywood. Okay. And so I was kind of like a trader by day, but DJ by night type thing.
Oh, so you weren't in Manhattan. When you were trading, you stayed in Southern California.
I stayed in LA.
Okay.
So I was working New York hours though. So
okay.
I started at basically 5:30 in the morning.
Okay.
But 2:30 the bell went off, and like it was 2:30 in sunny Los Angeles.
Yeah.
And I was already off work, so you
got to
do
something.
You could go to the beach, you could do whatever you wanted, right? Like the only unfortunate thing was especially in downtown LA at that time, like happy hour didn't start that early. Right, like you got off, and there was, we had to go to like Carl's Jr. that happened to serve pitchers of beer,
right,
or happy hour, waiting for real happy hour spots. But and so I was doing banking and then music and all that because there's music was my passion, and all throughout this time, like I was always playing video games. It was just something I always did, right? And I was playing a lot of Street Fighter, I think, at the time, and whatnot, and because I think there's this kind of culture of like. A lot of producers, DJs do play video games or did play. I think there's just this inherent, even artists, right? Like they may not identify as gamers, but then they'll be like, no, I'm not a gamer. But then you go and be like, man, you got an Xbox and a PS. Like, oh yeah, I play a lot of FIFA. I play a lot of. It's like okay, and so I think it was less about for identifying as gamers. Just I love playing video games, and so fast forward to kind of early 2013. And League of Legends is starting to grow, and there was this kind of opportunity basically coming to Riot, and it was like to explore music, right? And Riot was much smaller at that time, and really we came in with the direction of just like oh, what could music mean for us, right? Like, and it was on the lens, and to kind of give context, right, is a bunch of us who started we went to college together at SC. Like we were the ones who had the radio show. So there was an inherent understanding of taste and like how we would approach it. And so we weren't trying to make video game music. We were just trying to make good music. Right. We had there was just one composer at Riot at the time, super talented Christian Link, who's also, if you came across kind of Arcane, which is our animated series, that's been announced. So he's the creative director behind all that as well. A very, very talented creative guy. And so there's just this small group, 3 of us basically, that were kind of like, all right, what do we want to do with music? And just started exploring things, everything from like, who could we collaborate with, on that, you wouldn't normally think of. And there's this new champion being developed in League of Legends. His name was Lucian. And he's this kind of double gunslinger, really slick, kind of like Neo from Matrix / like really slick and futuristic to an extent. And we were like thinking, oh, this like kind of electro upbeat. We kept referencing Crystal Method, right? From us, like, this kind of reminds me of Crystal Method. And they were just like, maybe we should just call Crystal Method and see if they'd want to like collaborate and like create a song together. And we met the dudes, and the sweetest homies in the world. They were right up in the valley. And we basically worked with them and created a track for this champion. So when the champion released, we had this really cool backtrack that was like really spoke to who he was coming out the gate. And it resonated really well with our players. There's
just so much, right? There's so much I want to ask you, and I just want to let you keep going because I think it's
feel free.
But it's awesome what you're saying. I was just thinking about when you first got. Are you working at this point? Are you actually working for Riot?
Yeah. So
so you're working for Riot. 2013.
2013, early 2013 is when I jumped on. It pretty much was like we were we came over to look and figure out like, oh, what could this look like? And we pretty much created an agreement like, hey, let's do this. Because I thought at first, this was going to be like a consulting gig. So I was good friends with one of the co-founders of League of Legends at Riot Games. And so, and again, he was also in the show with us as well, the radio show with us. And so music, again, being kind of our common connector. And so I thought it was going to be like a consulting gig, like a few hours here and there just to kind of give advice. But as we were talking about it, it was like, this is like, you want to like build something here. You want to do something here. And so it's like, need to put more time into it. And so I was like, all right, put it on paper, if this is like a real thing. And I think it was like the next week, there was like, here you go. And I was like, all right, let's do this. Right?
So you sign a contract or agreement, or, you guys come to terms. And then did they basically say to you at that point, here you go, just take it wherever you want? Was it a clean slate and it was just up to you to make those decisions about which way you go? And I actually had a question for probably further on in the conversation, but you brought it up. how do you determine when to reach out to talent and stars outside of Riot? And now, because you guys in-house have a pretty solid, I was I was on your website. I was looking, I was like, oh my God, like this is so much music in-house that you guys have. I mean, as far as talent goes. So did they give you a clean slate? Did you kind of come on? That was how you came on, and it was like boom, boom, boom. And then how did you decide to get those guys involved? Crystal Man.
Yeah, I mean, it's been actually a slow builder. Like where we are now is like we're a full in-house music production team, which we've actually always been. So we have in-house songwriters, composers, producers, music coordinators, from soup to nuts. So we will write a song, produce it, record it all the way to, and then sometimes figure, oh, it'd be cool to have this talent on here because they're exactly how we envision the song, and then we'll reach out. And so we also, amongst our team, we have kind of like what we call artist and relations guys, right? So guys who have contacts with, artists or managers directly, so that we can, like, if they're a good fit, we bring them in and see if they want to be a part of this recording or activation, right, to a live performance at our world performances and stuff. So, it's really just, it was never really like, hey, just go at it. It was, we actually had to figure out what we wanted to do as we went. Like it's discovery the whole time of like, all right, what's the opportunity here, right? Like, oh, there are some characters coming out, and that's actually where we first landed. Because I can say the first few days we got in, and it was just like, all right, so what are we gonna do, right? It's like, well, let's put like artists. Like we started there, but then it's like, I think what really gravitated for us is finding those opportunities. We're like, oh, there's this character coming up, and it's like, oh, like we could do, because sometimes you just do like background music that's just kind of way in the background, just kind of thematic. Where for us, we're like, oh, let's create a song for that person, right? And then that escalated into like, oh, let's do a song and a music video. Right. And you got to remember, this was 2014, I think, is when we released this. It was, was it 13, I think, actually. Man, it's been a blur. But like early on, so we had another character coming out. Her name was Jinx. And she's just kind of very, like, kind of crazy, loose cannon, loose gun, blows everything up around her. But she's kind of laughing and giggling. She thinks it's fun type character, right? And so Christian was super inspired, like, let's create like a pop rock song, like a really cool song for her, and let's do a music video, right? Because often how it is, if you think from a marketing standpoint, is, it's easy to say like, hey, here's a character, read these 2 paragraphs about her, right?
Right.
This is what she does.
That's what I was going to ask you. Yeah. I was going to ask you if they just gave you like a little summary of the character, or if you actually sat down with the creative team on that side too.
Yeah, we actually sat in with the development team, so that there's these teams when it came to creating the character. It wasn't like, oh, one person who draws. There's everything from like designers, so concept artists, right? Design, like, oh, what is her thematic? What is her attitude? Who is she? What's her part in this world? So we're really building. It's like building a Marvel character, like starting like, who is Iron Man? Like, well, it's Starks. There's like, and you have all of these people building this character, and we got to sit in with them, going back and forth to understand who this character was, right? Because we wanted to do it justice in a way, right? So you're sitting with visual artists to kind of like editorial folks who are thinking of like how to write, like to describe her, and we were part of the evolution, because it wasn't that like they just came like, here she is. It was like, well, here's kind of the concept, and we hope by like X amount of weeks we're going to be here. So it was always a learning process of like, hey, we found out, they'd say, this didn't work. She's not really like this because it broke, whatever. Like, it just doesn't make sense. So we switched this a little bit, like, oh, okay, cool. Right. And so it's a back and forth, and we're showing them our progress of like, what do you think this song, how does this feel? And they're like, yo, this feels like her, right? Like, this is good. And so it's just like a really cool symbiotic kind of evolution to like getting to a point where here she is from every vertical, like visual, all this, and here's a song, right, that we think matches. And at the same time that we were doing that, we were producing a music video, which for our team, which was 3 of us, we'd never produced a video, right? Like, we don't come from that background. Like, music and business and marketing and creative was kind of like our gear. So and this is different too, right? Because this is virtual, right? This is a character. So this video isn't like you're not going out on the street and filming something. Never done animation, right? And that's a whole nother beast, right? And so it's great as we found a good partner and like created our first music video. And it really resonated well when we like basically announced the character, and this music video came out, and it was like, 2.5-minute action packed music driven video, kind of showcasing who she was. And like the views, especially back then, people are like, oh, you're a video game company, why would you produce music videos, right? It's kind of the first question, which was great. But then we did it, and then everyone was like, whoa, like once they saw it, it kind of like made sense, like, oh, you're showing us who this character is. Right. And it was definitely like our most viewed video, like quickly. Like out of all the history of what Riot had done, it quickly became the most viewed. And it got it wasn't not that it was viral, but it definitely became broader, where people were like, yo, this is really dope. Oh, this is for a video game? Became kind of like for people who were coming in who didn't know anything about League of Legends. And so it was really interesting, kind of the power of like of creative, and especially with music, right? How it can connect with people, because you walk away from that song and that music video, and you really get a solid idea of like who she is. Right.
And did you guys release that before she was released in the game, or was that after?
We actually, I think we did it as like a promo. So we pretty much said, here's a new character, she's coming out, right? And then that may have been like 2 weeks before she was actually available in the game, right? Okay. And to an extent, so people, by the time she was released in the game, people had a grasp of who she was, and they were potentially excited about her, right? Right. And that stuff. And so there's definitely kind of like a cadence to it all, and like when you do what. But that became like our first music video. From there, we ended up becoming like the music video dudes, where we started creating, like really crafting our chops and producing like really high quality and great music videos, and different ones. Some that are more narrative driven, like emotional. There's this one called Amumu, Curse of the Sad Mummy, which was a character that was actually already released in the game. So there wasn't really a business incentive. Like it wasn't like, oh, we're trying to sell this new character. It was literally, our team was passionate about like telling a really like creative story. Right. And so it allowed us to kind of dive deep into like a more emotional piece. And it's still to this day, like one of my favorite music videos that we've done. It's kind of a tearjerker in a way too. Like it's got some hooks in there that will tug on them. Right. Yeah. Yeah. And so, but this was us, like, we're very creative led here. Right. So we're learning how to do things. I mean, it wasn't that it was our intent. We were just excited, like, oh, like, let's do this. We think our players, because our audience, which we always call our players, right, because they play our game. Right. Our main focus is really them, right? Everything we do is for them. And so we know they want to know more about these characters, because in the game they play as the characters, but it's not a story-driven game, right? It's very action-packed. I kind of relate it to like sports, right? Like say if you watched every Laker game while Kobe was playing, right? You didn't get to know who Kobe was as a person. You didn't know his story. You just knew he was a really good player, right? And how he was a good player on the court. But many people who love Kobe wanted to know all that other stuff, right? Like, man, who is he? Like, and so we found that players were falling in love with our character, their champions, and they wanted to know those stories, right? Like, where is this person from? Where is Lux? Like, you say she's from Demacia. I see these images. Demacia sounds like a really cool place. Right. Tell us about Demacia. And we're like, oh yeah. Right. Right. We hadn't got into like super storytelling at that time yet. A whole lot, at least not a whole lot of in-depth storytelling. And so all of these are kind of like opportunities for us, not even just from a music standpoint, like just holistically, but for us, like we were excited from a music standpoint of like the different things you could do with music. And so that escalated. And then of course, esports started to grow really big for us. And we started creating music specifically for the esports scene for us. Yeah, man. Yeah. But I wanted to stick on that for a second, what you were just talking about, because that was super cool. And especially, the Kobe example, because I could see where, like, even if you weren't a basketball fan, right? If you saw in the community and just through some of the philanthropic things that Kobe did and that he was involved in, you become a Kobe fan, right? And so now if the Lakers are on, even if you're not a basketball fan and they're playing against whoever they're playing against, going up for the world championship, all of a sudden you're rooting for the Lakers just simply because Kobe's a great, great guy. Yeah. So you're watching the finals and wearing an 8 jersey. Yeah. Right? So in a way, you guys telling that story and the narrative behind these characters, you're doing the same thing, especially for, like, I think of my wife as an example. She doesn't really know that much about gaming, but if she saw this video that you're talking about and heard this great music and learned and watched this tear-jerking kind of story,
about this character. Now when she walks by and my kids are playing it, she would probably stop and look and be like, oh, and then who knows, for some people that may even make them play or have them play the game because it just seems like such a cool story.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, I don't know if that happens that often, but I can see that. And I can also see where we talk about, a character that had been in the game for a while that had never had that narrative or story behind them, where it would be very cool for the fans of the game to then be told about those things about that character.
Yeah, and I think even too, it goes full to like a little bit of the lens of, right, like there's always that direct driver to the game. Like you could potentially, right, create new players, right? Because they're like, oh, but I think even personally, like the opportunity too is like when you think of, for example, you do something like a music video or something that's more story driven. Say, for example, say you want like Iron Man, right? And then all of a sudden you decide to do an Iron Man movie, and you do these Iron Man things. It doesn't have to be the game anymore, right?
100%.
Right, so that is like super compelling. It becomes about the character and that, and so I think those are just really cool opportunities for us of like kind of exploring like these champions even outside of the game, right? And we've kind of done some of the stuff like I mean, what's been really cool is maybe came across like KDA kind of. Our virtual artists and stuff like that, right? Like, yeah, you can play those skins in the game, but it's been really fascinating to see how these people engage with that on social media. Like, you go to YouTube, you just type in KDA cover or any of that stuff, and like the cosplay that people create around this stuff, right? Like, when you think of the fandom around something like that, it's just for us, like, one, it's just like awesome to see our players kind of like embrace that stuff, but it also showcases like what that fandom could be like and what they want. And that's when you're really about trying to serve like our players, right? And just try to provide value for them. It helps kind of unlock some of those doors.
Yeah, that's super cool. So you said this is like 2013, 2014 when you really kind of create the music for your first character and a video. How many have you done since then, just strictly for League of Legends? And then you've got numerous titles now, in-house. Do you guys do the same thing for these other titles as well?
I mean, I think it could vary, right? Like it just really depends. Like League is unique in its way, and like there's certain things that work and don't work. Like it's kind of crazy when you think about League of Legends. It's like such a broad, like when you think of Harry Potter, for example, as an IP, it's like it's wizards, it's magic, right? League of Legends has wizards, it has dragons, it has mummies, it has futuristic laser gun. Like it's so broad, right? But that's also kind of really cool because you can do a lot of really cool things with that. And then with our game, what we do is we create what's called skins, right? So kind of like KDA is basically taking characters from our game and reimagining them in a different thematic, right? Okay. And so that's where it gets super creative. Like you could take, these characters that's like an animal from the jungle, right? And a dragon from whatever, some crazy fireplace, and then turn them into modern day pop stars or something, right? By just totally, they're still the same character. You look at them like, I know who that is, but you just made them look different. They have the same characteristics. Right. And it's just another way to engage with some of their favorite characters and another spin. And it allows us to kind of express like fun ways of showcasing like these different characters, our champions. And so that's like League of Legends, and this is evolving over years, right? So different titles may or may not be like that. It just really depends. I mean, it's just, I think for some of like our newer titles, we'll see as it goes, right? Okay. Like I will say, like it's fun to be working with these teams and these different titles as they come up. Like, you can see like Valorant, which is our first-person shooter, right? We just recently released we call them for Valorant, they're agents, right? The different characters are agents, and we released these agent playlists. So it's kind of like for this agent, right? For Jet, for example, it's like her playlist, and if you know her as kind of like of kind of like Korea and all this stuff, like we curated these songs as if it was her playlist, the things she would listen to, but it also dives deeper into who she is as a character. Right. And so for all these players that are starting to really play as these agents, right? Like, it was really cool to see how they're like, whoa, we haven't told a whole lot of story, but they feel like they're getting story, right, to an extent. And it's a cool way to vibe out, right? If you're going to play as Jet, like you got a playlist right?
Yeah,
So,
sure. And yeah, and the type of music, that you listen to, that I listen to, that somebody listens to as a character tells you a lot about who they are, right? It really does.
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you are kind of telling that story, but just telling it in a more subtle way, just because it's done
Mm-hmm.
through what they actually listen to. Um, this is great, man. I'm gonna be. You might be on with me all day today. no, no, but so you kind of touched on it a little bit earlier, but I wanted to know, especially with everything that's going on right now with COVID-19 and everything, and the pandemic, and a lot of people having to pivot. You guys had kind of gone the opposite way to me in a way back from not the opposite, but 2013, 2014, where you created videos that were not videos like we said on the street, so it wasn't IRL, if you will, in real life stuff. It was already digital, and now you have done some of the biggest work at live events, right? I think at Worlds and some like massive events with hundreds of thousands of people, or I don't know, it's 100,000, but 50 or 60 or 70 live right there. And then digitally, there's so many more watching. Where do you see? Do you like one over the other as far as the genres go? Or are they completely different? Is it just, talking about the digital experience and the live experience?
Yeah, I mean, at least for me, like personally, right? Like I think there's like each one has its benefits, right? Like I personally, when you go to a venue and you're just immersed in it, like to me, there's almost no, like it's hard to replace that, right? That surrounded by other people who you go there and you're like committing to be there and you're just submerged in it. So it's like you
got kids are partying.
I think they got home early. So how it works. So I don't think you can really like replace that, so to speak.
Yeah.
Right. And so I think you got to treat it a certain way and like help to, when the audience goes there, you see it and you perform that. So like a lot of our performances, and even just like the broadcast and esports itself, like from a music standpoint, right? We do think about like the in-house audience as well as the broadcast. Like we want to make sure that it's appealing to both, right? Because there are some people who prefer like, I want to buy a ticket. I want to go there and see it because it feels larger than life, and it's hard to replace that with the screen, right? You can look at it and be like, that looks larger than life, but to feel it, to be there, and just to know like only so many people could be there, right? Makes it special. And this again is like my opinion on it. So, but I think there are times when you can kind of flex with digital, right? You can do some stuff that you just can't do physically, right? And stuff like that. So I think it's really always, that to me is actually really fun, and to see like our teams work on is like finding creative ways to make physical and digital work at times, right? Like if you saw True Damage that we did in Paris, right? Like how they did with the holograms, like that to me it wasn't just a hologram show, right? The artists were there. Like you saw an integration of basically holograms with people in a live art, like, and that show was appealing both to a live audience because they got to see all the fancy stuff as well as to the broadcast, right? And so to me, I was just like, that was an amazing job by like the whole, just everybody involved in esports, the opening ceremony, broadcast, our music team that helped with me. Like it's such a big effort to do that, and like I commend them for like what they were able to do there.
Yeah, man. And as more and more of this blends, this metaverse and virtual reality, and then the music, and then it's amazing. We're at an amazing time right now. And that's why I was so excited to get on. Yeah, and I was so excited to get on with you. And again, this like 100, and I hate jumping all over the place, but it's just that it's so easy to do. So I'm thinking right now of being completely immersed, right? Listening to your music, some of the things you guys have created, and then being involved in this story that's going on, whether it's in the game or it's a video. When you talk about the audio piece of it and hearing, are you guys partnering, working with like the actual companies that produce the equipment, whether it's speakers, whether it's headphones? Do you spend time with those guys because you're providing the backdrop, you're providing the experience, but without really, really, really good equipment. And I was talking to Wendy from HyperX the other day, and that's the only reason I bring it up, because we're talking about constantly upgrading and upgrading and upgrading. It's the same way visually. Back in the day, we were talking about like, when we were growing up. I mean, and if you're playing a game or you're watching a sports title in 1990s, it's completely different today with all the HD, right? So do you guys work with those guys at all? It's just that's a curiosity thing more than anything.
Yeah, I mean, I can't speak for like all the different teams, right? Like, I mean, when it comes to like, for example, live production, like we have an events team and events teams, right, at work. And so as far as like, they probably focus on like, hey, how do we create the best experience from a live experience, right? Like who they're talking to, I'm not quite sure, right? But
Right.
I know what we're usually just the broad approach, right? And something we have to always keep in mind, and like you mentioned, is like the different audiences, right? So often with gamers, I'll say just the gamers, or even people who are watching a broadcast, right? It's either two speakers from the computer, headphones, right? Which can be limiting on really, right? Like you can go crazy with like, the audio, but if they don't have the equipment to listen to it in, right? Like, I mean, I think a good example is VR, right? To an extent, right? Like you can go ham and make a crazy VR experience, but if those people don't have a VR headset,
Right.
then it's right. It's you're limited by the hardware to an extent on some of that stuff. And this is just kind of my personal opinion on it. But but I think it is still very interesting to find those like ways of kind of leveling up the experience if it's through audio and through music, right? It's not like a pure focus, at least for me right now, of that, just because I know there are limitations, potentially of hardware, because like we could create the greatest sounding thing, but if players are listening on $30 headsets mostly and beyond, then it's like, right. But I mean, we, from a quality standpoint, we have a bar that we do make sure it gets to, so if people are listening to something good, it should sound good, because that's just from us, from a craft standpoint. But when it gets into that other stuff that's very niche, I think it's harder for us to focus on it, at least right now. Right. But I think it's exciting. I think there's going to be, through these next few years, right, like it always, like hardware eventually catches up, I think, hopefully, on stuff where, whether it becomes cheaper or it's just integrated in the standard hardware, right? Like all of a sudden headsets just are automatically have like more 3D, type stuff. And then, I think you can create that type of stuff, right, for that, or create content for that. So
yeah. I mean, I just again, music, and it is a different experience, and I didn't realize it because I kind of come from the old school gaming, and when I was an old school gamer, you sat down and you played, and you just had the music from the monitor that was in front of you, right? The sound just came from there. And then when my kids started gaming 5, 6, 7, 8 years ago, I used to play music because I would play music when I gamed. And they kept turning the music down. I'm like, why are you guys turning the music down? And they would put their headsets on. They're like, Dad, because we can't hear like the footsteps coming up behind us.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. They're playing first-person shooters. And stuff.
Yeah. And I'm like, what is that? And so then you sit down and I started playing with them. I'm like, man, I totally get it. So
it's funny. And just to kind of add on to that, right? Like I usually, how I parallel that with like when folks are like, oh, do you have like a lot of music kind of throughout the game? And I was like, no. I was like, well, if you think about, like, if you watch basketball, right, you have to think from the player's perspective, the guys on the court, right? The music blasts, but as soon as the whistle blows and they start to play, it dies out, right? Because they need to hear their calls, what they're saying. They need to hear sneakers. Like, that stuff's important to them. And so the music has to get out of the way during the game. And it's kind of that way when they're playing the game. Like, they need to hear those audio cues.
Dude, I love you. It's so funny you said it because I used to play college football back in the day. Yep. And it would drive me crazy going to, like, whether it was a Dolphins game or a Heat game.
Visitor games?
Yeah. And sometimes and I mean, that's his job, but sometimes would leave the music going, like, as they started bringing the ball in bounds. I'll be like, what are you doing, man? The game started. You got to, like, turn the music off, because that's just how I am. Because, like you said, I want to be focused, and I'm like, now I'm in the game. Played in between, but now I'm in the game. Yeah. I saw something that was just released. And again, this is one of those, and I go to the legal side of esports and gaming, and just how I think it's a massive area right now that needs so much help. Right. And then when you cross over music and rights, the stuff that you guys are doing, the talent you're working with, and then you have streamers and content creators and all these people that are just pulling stuff. Yeah, I think you posted something just recently, and I read it, and I was just like, man, it's such a complicated thing. Who's policing it? Who's governing it? Like, who's making up the rules? Like, what, so for you guys on your side, because just talking from Riot's side, I think you guys just released something that kind of said, okay, here you go, content creators, here you go, streamers, you can use our, what we produce, you can use our music under these circumstances or these guidelines. So how does that work? Are you involved with that at all? Or is that one of those where you kind of do the music and then you send it over and the attorneys take care of it? And
no, highly involved in it. been highly involved with that since 2013.
I was, that was when I wanted to jump on with you. I was like, you know what, we're going to talk about a lot of the fun stuff of the business, and then I got to ask you one of the questions about one of the parts that's just probably not that much fun.
Yeah, trust me. I'm, of course, I'll phrase like I'm not a lawyer, attorney, copyright, or anything official of that. I will say I feel like I should be with how much I've been right. So I mean, this goes back to for us, and like a lot of this cascades into almost why we have an internal production. It's not the why we have a internal production team, right? But it's part of, right. So our whole North Star is like our players, right? Like we want to deliver great music, great experiences for our players. With copyright, like it can be tricky depending, right? Just copyright laws altogether. And we found out early on, we had to learn, because again, we started from a creative perspective, like, oh, let's like do this stuff. But when you work with, for example, a big artist, right, that comes with, labels or songwriters and stuff and publishers, and they have, the contracts are based on certain things. And so you get into basically the contractual side, the business side, right, of kind of ownership and copyright. And so, and we understood that like, hey, that could make things pretty tricky, right? Like, and especially, even in 2013, we were very, very thinking digital, right? All our content was on YouTube, right? We focused heavily on YouTube, where there were still a lot of things that weren't quite so digital, right? Like copyright law hasn't caught up to a lot of that stuff, right? To an extent, right? And so it made things hard, right? When you're thinking like, oh, where's this music going to be and how? We had to learn that language of articulating, like, because for us, we're like, oh, it's going to be on YouTube and it's in perpetuity, right? And all that stuff. And that was kind of scary words back then. They're like, perpetuity, like who grants licenses for in perpetuity,
right.
And so through us, we kind of run a way of like, by us kind of like producing most of the in-house stuff and everything, we're able to control that, right? And really it was about like, hey, for on YouTube, we saw that a lot of our players, a lot of our fans and stuff, and content creators, they create content, right? And a lot of times it's celebrating the thing they love, which at times can be League of Legends, right? Like we release a song and they want to do a cover of it. They want to showcase their talent singing our song, which me personally, I'm like, awesome. Like, it's
amazing, yeah.
Like I'm flattered. We're flattered, right, that they would even do that, right? Because it's their talent. They want to showcase their love for it. And so, it can be hard with copyright laws for people to even be able to do that, right? And so we have kind of our basic we call it jibber jabber.
Yeah, I saw that jibber jabber.
Jibber jabber, right? So it's just basic guidelines, right? And it's really with the intent of, right, like, yeah, if you create content, you can use it as long as you're creating content, as long as you're not like exploiting it, right? Trying to make money off it in a way that's like, doesn't feel right, right? Like you're just like, for example, if you're taking our song and then re-uploading it onto Spotify, like that's probably not good, right?
Right.
Just like general guidelines that we're trying to get, like, yeah, but if you want to do covers and sing and use it as background music while you're like creating content, talking about something, and often it's talking about League of Legends, like to us, we're like, that's cool. We encourage that, right? And so we've done our best to help and try to protect that in a way. So when we create content, to try to allow for that. So when we released that statement last night, I think there's like, I don't know, like I'm gonna say 300 pieces of music that we have that we 100% own, so that we can say, hey, players, with this stuff, we control it. So our guidelines, we're letting you know, like, and so that pretty much lets you know, like, no, we're not going to go and DMCA it if you're within these guidelines. Again, not doing any egregious exploitations and stuff like that. You're pretty much good. So, and a lot of that like was for us understanding how to. It's helped us even in working with artists as well and stuff. So I'd say even with some of our deals, there's more flexibility that caters to kind of how we like distribute our music and get it out for players, so that. But that's always a part of the business. We want to do something really cool and creative, but we do have to handle the business side as well on that stuff. So
yeah. And when you release, like right now, because these I mean, my kids will be walking around the house humming these tunes and stuff. It's become the music itself, right, has become something that's more than I don't want to say more than just the game, but it's separate from the game sometimes, right?
Yeah.
So do you guys monetize? Like, do you throw like one of these songs, like you said, when you do a video, do you throw it up there and now it is something that you can purchase on Spotify, so that it's not just part of the game, it's actually lives separately as well?
Oh yeah, so we started back in 2014. I think it was 2014. We had our first. We had this like virtual band called Pentakill, and it was and back then iTunes, Spotify was not around yet. Back then, and so we learned what it was like, because we would just put our music on SoundCloud because it was easy. You sign up and just put it there. So we just put our music there, and we inherently knew, like when we talked to us, like, oh, where do you get your music? And someone's like, oh, I download from iTunes. Right. And so this is actually a funny story, is we actually hit up iTunes and we're like, hey, can we put our album on iTunes but have it be free to download? And they kind of look at us like, well, someone has to pay that cost, right? and then we're like, oh, how much is it? It's like however much, but we look like, oh wait, but like, you've got like millions of players, and how much does that could cost us a lot, like just to get it out there, right?
Right.
And that was just because I think the world was learning like a new way of paying for music, right? Like used to just like, hey, if you like it, you bought it. But we were into like, so our game is free to play, right? And to us, there was kind of this mantra like, well, we want, it wasn't about a business for us. We wanted players to be able to listen to our music for free, and that's why it's on SoundCloud. And at first we were just like, but people have to pay on Apple. And for some reason at that time, we were just like, it didn't seem like it felt good. But now you fast forward it, everybody understands if you want to listen to music, you have a subscription here or you pay for it here, right? And so now we do put it in all those places. And so wherever you're at, our music is there with the rest of your music catalog that you like to listen to, right? And so so our music is there on Spotify, and I want to say, and on YouTube, because I want to say our KDA is probably around like 350 or something million streams. Plays on the music video. Right. We have a few that are north of 100 million as well. And then now we've been developing kind of like our marketing, or building the team within music here. So that's kind of like the past 2 years is really kind of scaling the team, both from a production standpoint, but also like marketing and distribution and business to an extent on that stuff. So that's allowed us to like help create a better experience on Spotify, for example, right? Getting on playlists and stuff like that. It was really cool to see, in fact, that it charts, like KDA, actually Popstars charted number one world, I think it was digital sales. Then, and as well as a few other things that did well. And did well actually across the globe on many, like everything from QQ music in China to like in Korea as well. I think it was Line and all those. Like it did pretty well globally. And so, and for us, it's like, cool, how do we kind of like market in those spots so that it gets in the places that it needs to? And so it's been really interesting to see how we've been able to grow in that space.
Yeah, it's again fascinating to me, because when I was growing up, you listen to a radio station, you can go see somebody play live, you can buy their cassette, their CD, whatever it is, and then you could get things digitally online. But now when you release a song through like League or through one of your guys' titles, you actually have a much, much bigger audience to release your music through through the games.
No, yeah.
Because it's global and there's millions of people playing. And so immediately you have an audience. It's just, it really is. It's amazing to me. And it's one of those things I don't think, many people, I'm speaking for other people, but I'm just for myself, like you didn't really think about it. And I had this conversation. I don't know if you know him. He's an East Coast guy, but Hip Hop Gamer was on the podcast probably like 3 weeks ago. And we started talking about this, and he was blowing me away because he's like, Tommy, you have no idea. He goes, music is music and gaming and the convergence and the things that are happening right now. And he was and I was like, wow, I got off that podcast. I was like, man, I hadn't even thought about it, and a lot of times the music and still there's radio stations, right? But for music to be played on a radio station, I don't even know how that goes, but it's got to go to each one of those radio stations, right? Unless they're syndicated or something. And for you guys, anything in-house that you put out is just instantly in front of hundreds of millions of people.
Well, you got to think about it. It's in a way, and you can probably relate because of the kids, right? Is video games is potentially similar to being their radio station. They're not sitting in cars listening to the radio. If back in the day, probably 3 hours of my day at least was listening to the radio. Yeah. I could probably now say like that's not true for the current kids, but they're playing at least 3 hours of a video game a day for some kids, right? Or at times. And so it's like, imagine if they're getting their music from there. You know, games, you know, have proven to almost be like social networking for them to an extent, right? They hang out with their friends for a certain amount of time. They talk about the things they like. They all have like interests. So it's a really fascinating space. And so it's one of those where it's been around, but like a lot of people haven't if you weren't gaming, you just weren't really paying attention to it. Right. And so now comes this like niche of, I think I was talking with someone just the other day, right? Like I think it was 2017. And we had this song called Legends Never Die, which is our world's anthem. Yeah. And a great song. And we worked super talented Chrissy Costanza. And it's not that Chrissy, like incredibly talented, wasn't that she was like the super like Lady Gaga that everybody knew about. In fact, a lot of people didn't know who she was. But she was showing up to our world finals to perform in front of 80 million people live. Right? Like
live. Wow.
Live. Yeah. Live. And so to me, I was just like fascinated. And it's such a great song. Like that to me is like a special moment because it was cool to see her perform that live. And I remember because I'd known about her for a while because she was a League player. She played League of Legends. She was part of our community. Right. I remember always watching her content because she would do covers. I was like, oh, there's this like, she's, this great gal. She does covers. She has a great voice. She's a good League player and loves that. And then now to see her performing live in front of 80 million people.
Yeah, that's a great story. That's a great story.
Yeah. And so, and even then, like she got to, for people who saw, is like in China, there's a Billy, which is kind of like Spotify. It's huge, right? A huge platform. And they had their end of the year gala that they do, basically kind of like you would think like an award show, right? Big, huge production, very long. All the biggest stars come and perform live. And they hit us up like, hey, we'd like to have Chrissy come and perform that song Phoenix, which was the world's anthem from last year, at our gala, right? And so it's like, she's getting huge exposure to the Chinese audience, and they embraced that song and embraced her, and they love her because like she did Legends Never Die, and now she does Phoenix, and those songs did very well in China, and stuff like that. So it's been fascinating to see that. Yeah, I don't know. It still blows me away.
Yeah, me too. And you're in it every single day, which is so cool. So, and I knew the time was going to fly, but I got a couple more things I wanted to talk to you about. I wanted to ask you just like what's coming up. You know what I mean? I always want to know what's on the radar for the near future that's super exciting, that you're jacked up about, and then just more in a general Riot Games, because you're in the music side of things, but then there's a lot going on in the world right now. I know Riot is trying to make a difference in a number of areas. So if we can talk about maybe just what you guys got going on, that's really exciting, and then maybe go into what's Riot doing in the world right now.
Yeah, I mean, I can definitely speak at least on mine. So as far as like what's coming down the pipeline, of course, like things had to we definitely had to adjust to the era of the times, right? Like everybody working from home pretty much and stuff like that. And it's almost hard, at least from my lens, right? To how do you plan for something that's 4 months from now, 3 months from now, when you don't know, like, are people going to be able to gather in a place? Is it going to be right? So we're always kind of like assessing everything as we go and whatnot. So, but I would say I'm super excited. We have Valorant that was just released. Yep. I've been playing it a ton. Definitely not great, but it definitely scratches that new competitive itch for me. And it's just and the vibe is just awesome. So I'm excited to once that when we get to explore that even more and some of the things, it's cool to see some of the folks on my team, how they've been working with the Valorant team. I'm kind of starting to explore that stuff. And then I think it's not that there's nothing I can't get into, but I think we'll see. I'm actually excited just the fact that my team exists, right? Players have really shown their love and passion for a lot of the things that we've done, with Worlds and whatnot. And so I think for us, it's understanding that opportunity space and really seeing what we can do. And I think especially there's opportunities, for us, some of the advantages, like digital, there are things we can do that are digital. There are things we can do that are like in, in a venue, for example. So all of that's on the table technically, right? And we're just going to continue to like really figure out how we can, based on the future of how everything's going to kind of pan out, like what we can really lean into. But we definitely got some stuff that we're just working on. Our team is always working on stuff.
Yeah. And
everything.
And I forgot to ask you this earlier, but that creative process, when you're thinking about it, are you kind of like the orchestra? What do they call the maestro? Are you the maestro? Like you guys, like the three of you guys are putting your minds together. This, and you're playing the game, and then you're like, okay, we can do this with this character. You guys aren't the ones who are actually playing the instruments, or how much of it is live instrumentation, and then how much of it is computer generated?
Man, it depends on the project. Like we've got some great talented composers, right? And so, it's one of those two. Like when you have great composers and guys that are great talented, who am I to tell them how to like compose and write? Like these guys are incredibly talented, and like our producers, they know what they're doing. Like that's why they're on our team. Like I can say that like I'm fortunate to be working with very talented individuals on that stuff, and so you can really lean on to what they're good at, right? And so some of the stuff that we create, right, it'll be a 60-piece orchestra that we record live, because that's the only, like, to get that, I don't want that big brass sound. You need many players. There's only so much you can do, and they've got access to like great quality sample libraries to do that stuff. And it just really depends on like the scope and scale of the project, right? Like some of it doesn't need all that. Like sometimes there'll be like a few sessionists, right? Like you're like, oh, I need someone to really play that cello, like, because this needs to bleed the person, the heart, the feeling. And so we'll get a cellist in, right? They'll get a cellist in and record them. So every project is different. It just depends on those needs. But we've got a great vast of like guys who are really good at like modern electronic production. And many of them actually are good across the board on stuff. And then we have some guys who are really great at just like that more traditional, like sound and what you think. But I mean, they all work in that space. Some of them have like really, really strong talents in it. And so it just really depends on the project.
Yeah, and I could see that. It's just some of the stuff that I really love from, I'm thinking way back in the day now, because I think this actually fits. I think Fleetwood Mac might have done a song called Tush. I think maybe that was called, but I think it was Fleetwood Mac, and I think they played with UFC's band. I think they were in it.
Yeah, we've done that. We've done that too.
Yeah, and that kind of stuff is
USC
super
band.
cool. Yeah, and so Metallica has done some of that, like, where they're crossing over, and you see the 310. Like I just love those, and you don't really call them mashups, but it's just that combination of the two, right? So that's again where you guys come from. I just, I first of all, before we finish, I just appreciate it, man. Just your time and energy is just fantastic. Yeah. So on the global side with Riot, as far as the whole company goes, what's going on? Because I thought I read something recently that they were giving $1 million for some cause-related activity, and then another $10 million for maybe underserved populations and things like that.
Yeah, kind of investing in communities, and I'll kind of default to like the messaging there, because I know they're working on the full like details of everything. But I think that the main gist of it is, right, like what's great and is awesome for even me to see that Riot is telling, because it wasn't like I had to give this message out, right, or anything. Like this came from the top down. Is that it's really trying to help to make a change, right? Like there's only so much you can do. I mean, you could put a post out there and great, right? You can say you're going to kind of like, oh yeah, we're going to, right? But the thing that I'm, I guess, kind of proud of is like they articulated how they're going to do it, right? Like we're going to invest money into basically helping, and especially for us too. And a lot of the things that we do, we just look to our players, because when it comes down to it, it's our players' money that we have, right? Like we do things and the players pay for it because they enjoy and love this game and the things around it. And they're invested in us in that way, right? And so it's great to know that like, hey, this also affects our player base, right? And so what you see is like, hey, we even think within the gaming space, there's a lot of great opportunity. In fact, there's a lot of underserved people who are trying to get into the gaming space some way or how, but don't have the resources, unfortunately, and stuff like that. So it's really cool to see that, specific to us, is we're able to kind of like show how we can give back in that area, right? And that's meaningful, to the whole movement, as well as to like even our players who this may even very much be relatable to an extent, right? And helping to make a change in the way that we can. So that's what I think is really cool about it.
Yeah, it's real concrete steps that you can actually look back to, and you can see that you're making that. And I think it's incredible, especially this time and age. And I love the fact that you say we always go back to our players, because again, it's kind of like gaming is similar to like a traditional pro sports athlete, right? I mean, right now it's more obvious. Like you've got I think the Premier League has started up again, or some of the soccer leagues have started up, and there's nobody in the stands. And if nobody's in the stands, then there's not big TV revenue that's coming behind it, right? Yeah. There's nobody buying tickets. So all the money that pro athletes make and that big publishers and gaming companies make comes from the people that play the game or the fans. Yeah. And so I love that, man, because you said that like 3 or 4 or 5 times throughout this. So it's obviously a pillar, a core philosophy as the company.
Pillar, it's pretty much our aspiration as a company is to become the world's most player-focused game company in the world. Like that's what we aspire to. And for me, has always been a great like guiding North Star, because like, and again, this is probably getting deeper into even just my interpretation of it, right? But like, I believe that like you can make decisions that are like business decisions, super easy, right? Like, hey, what makes us the most money? And that's actually very smart. Like you optimize and understand the best way to get the most money. That keeps the ability, right? And then that's full spectrum. You can go on the total other side of the spectrum and say like, what's best for our customer? And those could be great, but those could also be not sustainable, right? Like giving something away totally free would probably make them so happy. But you might not be around after so long to be able to give that away, right? So it's like finding, but like knowing like really what we're trying to accomplish, right? Like for example, everything you look at, our game is free to play, has always been free to play, right? And back when that was the first thing, like that was very different, right? Because some people ask like, well, why, like, how do you make money as a free to play game? Like, why would any business want to be a free to play game? Right? Now you look back 10 years later, right? And understand like all these decisions that we've made, and always at least question ourselves like, hey, is this for the players, right? Is this what the players intend, right, for them? And it helps keep the rails on of like, are we doing it for the right reasons? And it's one of those, if you do that, like the money and all that stuff comes in after that, right? Because they then trust you, and they're here because they know you're doing it for the right reasons, and stuff. And you create, it also forces you to create, to me, a better experience. Right. Like it's got to be good because they have to like it. Right. So that's just been my personal kind of take on it, and I think it's been a solid part of why we are where we are.
Yeah. Well, dude, it's been I'm telling you, amazing, and I'm not joking. Like I could talk to you for hours. You know what I mean? Like we should probably
again, man.
Yeah. It'd be great.
Like chat.
Yeah, it'd be great. And if you get a chance at some point, you're down in South Florida. It'd be great to see you. I'm out in California every once in a while, so
I'll let me know, man.
Yeah. But great stuff, man. I really appreciate it. How old are your kids?
I've got a 17-month-old, a boy, and a 4-year-old girl.
See, mine are 14 and 11. And I tell people all the time right now, like for me, like when I was going through this, as we started going through it was pretty easy for us. We adapted pretty easy because the kids, they were able to do their schooling online. It wasn't a big change for them. And the people that my heart really went out to, because I understand energy. There's different energy levels at different stages of the parenting process. Yeah. So for my friends that had kids like 17 months old to 4 years old, it's like, oh my God, because it's so much time and energy. So you and your wife, I was just, it's amazing. What's it say behind you? Did the kids do that?
This was an Riot music group. So it was an art project by my wife and the kids, basically a good like afternoon for them to work on stuff. They're like, hey, you're going to be, because, I'm on meetings pretty much all day. I mean, everybody is now, right, with the virtual stuff. But so she was just like, your background looks very plain, so we're just going to decorate it. And I was like,
that's awesome.
Sure, why not?
Yeah, that's super cool. Well, thanks, man. I appreciate it, TD. I appreciate it. I'll see you later. Man. All right. Be good.
Take it easy.
Take care. Ciao. I'd like to thank Toa for sharing his time, experience, and knowledge with us today. This was so much fun for me. I'm such a music freak, and digging into some of these stories behind the music that is defining these games, champions, agents, and huge events was beyond cool. He's such a great guy, and the sounds he and his team are creating and curating are defining a moment in time. You can listen to Toa again now, and you can also find timestamped segments of the show, links to his social pages, and more information about his company projects and media in the show notes. If you enjoyed our discussion, please let us know. Continue the conversation with me across all social platforms and become a part of the Ultimate Gamer community today by subscribing at ultimategamer.com. We release a new show every day of the week, Monday through Friday, so be the first to join us for some outstanding upcoming guests and or dive back into the library of previous Level Up pods to hear from some of the most brilliant minds in the space. Experts like CEO of Access Replay, Ellie Young, investor and founder of C4 Plus, Chris Cheney, and mental health performance coach at Unleash the Athlete, James Leith, just to name a few. You can find all of these episodes and more on the Ultimate Gamer website, on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Stitcher, Spotify, or wherever you listen to your pods. And finally, please like, rate, review the show. It helps us reach the gaming community to spread the word and share the wisdom of our guests, as well as some of the most thought-provoking stories in the industry. Shout out, as always, to the Ultimate Gamer. I look forward to being with you on the next Level Up Podcast.